Imagine a place where two countries meet and their languages just sort of mingle in really surprising ways.
Yeah.
Our deep dive today takes us to exactly that kind of spot, Subatik Island. It sits right on the border between Indonesia and Malaysia. We're going to be exploring this approach to teaching English. English is a foreign language, or EFL. It's called Communicative Language Teaching, CLT. Basically, it's all about getting you to actually use the language, blending, listening, speaking, reading, writing, with the main goal being real communication.
Right. And we're pulling insights from this really fascinating qualitative case study that was done right there on Subatik Island. We'll be looking into how teachers are, actually putting CLT into practice day to day. And crucially, the very specific challenges they run into, often because of this unique border location.
So our mission today is to really unpack how this teaching approach works, or sometimes doesn't work, in a border region like this. We want to show how these geographical circumstances can really shape language learning and uncover the hurdles, both internal and external, that affect how well students do. Expect some pretty surprising insights into how context really defines learning. Okay, let's dig in. Communicative language teaching, CLT. It sounds straightforward, but what exactly is it, and why is it considered such a big deal for, EFL classes?
Well, at its heart, CLT fundamentally shifts the goal of learning a language. It's not about, say, just memorizing grammar rules off a page. It's about using the language to actually communicate something meaningful. Think of it less like studying a subject and more like developing a practical skill, like learning to swim by getting in the water.
Okay, so less theory, more doing.
Exactly. This whole approach really started gaining ground in Europe back in the 1970s, and by the 1980s, it was being used globally because frankly, it worked. It showed real results in improving students' ability to actually talk to each other in English.
So it's about setting up situations that kind of force students to communicate, pushing them to use the language, maybe creatively, in ways that feel more like real life.
Precisely. You've got researchers like Savignon and Littlewood who pointed out, back in 2007, that teachers should really focus on building communication skills first. The key idea is that if you push for good communication, the need for accurate grammar actually becomes more apparent to the student. It makes them want to learn it to be understood better.
That makes sense. So the motivation for grammar comes from the need to communicate effectively. So what does this actually look like in a classroom? What kind of activities are we talking about?
Well, you'd see students doing things like giving instructions to each other in English, having actual conversations, maybe small focus group discussions. They might compile dialogues and practice them, do role-playing exercises, play language games, even hold debates. The key is that it's all happening primarily in English.
So very interactive.
Very. And it's holistic. It aims to develop all four skills: listening, speaking, reading, writing together, because that's how we use language in real life. It provides contexts that are realistic, hopefully enjoyable, and relevant, whether they're social, cultural, or even scientific.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. The study focuses specifically on Subatik Island. What is it about this place that makes it so special for language learning?
Subatik's defining feature, as you said, is that direct border with Malaysia. It's not just a line on a map, it's a daily reality. And in Malaysia, English isn't just a foreign language people study in school. It's officially a second language, ESL. That's largely because of its history as a British colony right up until 1957.
So English is just more present there in daily life.
Much more so. You'll see public signs, hear announcements. Often in English, people are just more accustomed to encountering it, using it actively or passively.
So for people on the Indonesian side, on Subatik, living right next door, how does that constant exposure play out?
It leads to something called language acculturation. There's a lot of interaction back and forth, especially for trade. And so English terms naturally get picked up and used by people on the Subatik side. The study actually calls this a two-edged sword.
How so?
Well, on one hand, some might argue it sort of waters down pure Indonesian, but the flip side is it seems to have this really positive effect on students' ability to pick up English. It's a perfect example of what researchers like Cheng talked about, the environment strongly stimulating language acquisition.
That's fascinating, like learning through osmosis. Almost.
Mm-hmm.
And what about the students? Does this mean they come into the classroom with different levels of English?
Oh, absolutely. It creates a really diverse mix. You have quite a few students on Subatik who actually do their primary schooling over in Malaysia. So when they come back for secondary school in Indonesia, they often already have a pretty good foundation in English. That's obviously a big help for teachers trying to use CLT.
Okay, so some students have a head start.
Right. But then you have the contrast. Many other students have parents who work in Malaysia as migrant workers. This often means less parental supervision at home and sometimes less motivation or support for schooling. So teachers are juggling this really wide range of backgrounds and abilities in one classroom. It's complex.
Wow, yeah. So with that mix of students and this unique border influence, how are the teachers on Subatik actually doing CLT? What did the study find on the ground?
Well, the implementation really varies quite a bit from teacher to teacher. Out of the 4 teachers they interviewed in depth, 2 seem to have a really solid understanding of CLT and how to apply it. One teacher's understanding was described as quite good, but another, well, they needed a much better grasp of why this communicative approach is so important.
What causes those differences? Is it about their training, their background?
It often links back to what we call teacher cognition. Basically, a teacher's own beliefs, their knowledge, how they think about teaching. Educational backgrounds seem to play a role. Teachers who graduated from, say, well-regarded universities with strong education programs tended to have a better handle on these pedagogical concepts. Those maybe without a specific teaching degree sometimes struggled more. And of course, experience matters too. How long they've been teaching shapes their practice. People like Borg, Meisner, they've written about this.
Right. And the study actually observed these teachers in their classrooms. What did those observations show?
They did, and it really brought the differences to life. For example, at one school, SMPN1 Subatik Tengah, they saw really intensive interaction between the teacher and students, lots of questions and answers, discussions, mostly in English or sometimes bilingual. And the students, especially those who'd been to primary school in Malaysia, they were really enthusiastic, responding well. It sounded quite dynamic.
Okay, so that sounds like CLT working pretty well. What about other schools?
At another school, SMPN2 Subatik Tengah, they found CLT was also implemented quite well, quite attractively. The students seemed engaged. The teacher there was described as a strong facilitator, really trying to get students communicating actively. But the students, while they were trying, seemed a bit stiff, a bit hesitant.
Interesting. Why do you think that was?
Well, interestingly, that particular school isn't located right on the border itself. It's a bit further inland. So the day-to-day natural interaction with Malaysian English isn't quite as intense there. That environmental factor seems to make a difference.
Wow, so the immediate location, even within the island, matters. And then there was the third school, SMPN1 Subatik Utara. You said that was quite different.
Yeah, that one was a stark contrast. The researchers found that CLT implementation just wasn't happening smoothly at all. The teachers there mostly used Indonesian in the classroom. Students were described as very passive. When asked questions in English, the response was poor. The whole class just lacked energy, lacked liveliness.
Any idea why it was so different there?
Again, location seemed key. That area borders oil palm plantations owned by Malaysia, not communities where people interact daily, so very little natural English exposure. And the teacher they focused on, P4, explicitly said they found CLT hard to implement because the students' English was just too weak. Plus, this teacher admitted preferring a more traditional teacher-centered approach. This might link back to their educational background, which wasn't in teaching.
So it really highlights how it's a combination, isn't it?
Right.
The teacher's understanding and skills, plus the student's background, plus the immediate environment.
Exactly. All those factors interacting.
It certainly sounds like these teachers are up against a unique set of challenges. What are the main hurdles they mentioned when trying to make CLT work effectively?
Probably the biggest one, mentioned by almost all the teachers, was the students' lack of self-confidence. They're just hesitant to speak up, to express themselves spontaneously in English. There's a real fear of making mistakes, messing up pronunciation, or...
Yeah, fear of error. Yeah, that can be paralyzing.
It really can. And often it's coupled with a genuine lack of vocabulary, which just makes the confidence issue worse. On top of that, you sometimes have this mindset issue. Some students, maybe even some parents, just believe English is inherently difficult, especially if they didn't start learning it early in elementary school. That really dampens motivation.
So a lot revolves around the student's internal barriers. But what about bigger picture things? Systemic problems, external factors getting in the way.
Oh, there are definitely those too. Firstly, as we mentioned, some teachers just don't fully grasp CLT, or they're maybe too used to the comfort zone of teaching mainly in Indonesian. That's a barrier right there. Then there's a significant lack of academic supervision. The study found principals rarely, or in one case never, actually observe classes to help improve teaching methods. And the district education office, they might only visit once a year. Even the observations under the new Merdeka curriculum, which is supposed to be progressive.
Yeah, what about those?
They tend to focus more on things like classroom management, positive discipline, rather than the specifics of how English is being taught communicatively. The pedagogical quality isn't the main focus.
I remember the original study mentioning something about political dynamics affecting principals.
Yes, that's another layer. Apparently, there are frequent changes in school principals, often driven by practical political factors, as the study put it.
Meaning not always based on merit.
Yeah, that seems to be the implication. And this constant churn disrupts any kind of long-term planning or consistent leadership. It can really lower teacher morale and motivation to improve their own skills. Teachers also felt the curriculum wasn't quite right. They felt a lack of government input in designing a syllabus that truly meets the students' specific needs on Subatik, especially regarding practical speaking skills. And finally, there's not enough push from the government to promote things like student competitions, storytelling, speeches, news reading in English.
Things that would actually encourage speaking.
Exactly. Those kinds of events can be powerful motivators, giving students a real reason to practice and improve their speaking, but they seem to be lacking.
Okay, so we've talked about the teachers, the students, the system. What about the actual physical stuff, the resources? How do facilities or the lack of them impact CLT on Subatik? Because, I mean, you need stuff to do interactive activities, right?
Absolutely, you hit the nail on the head. Teacher skill is crucial, yes.
Yeah.
But things like a decent internet connection or ideally an English language laboratory,
Yeah.
those are vital tools for really accelerating speaking skills and making CLT truly effective. Technology opens up so much, right? Easy access to online materials, videos, authentic listening practice, ways for students to record themselves. Kanika Budwar wrote about this back in 2017, how tech broadens access and knowledge.
Makes total sense. So what's the reality on Subatik Island for these kinds of facilities?
Well, here's the really stark, almost unbelievable finding. None of the junior high schools on Subatik Island have an English language laboratory. Not one.
Wow, none at all.
Zero. One teacher from SMPN2 Subatik Tenga explicitly stated their school has no English lab and no internet access. They said it makes applying the CLT approach incredibly difficult. How can you focus on communication if you lack the basic tools?
That's a massive obstacle. What did the teachers think about the potential impact if they did have labs?
They were unanimous. All the teachers interviewed strongly agreed that language labs would be hugely beneficial. They talked about how labs could help students practice correct pronunciation without feeling judged, build confidence in a controlled environment, access tons of learning content. They clearly see the value.
So why aren't they there? Is this something the government isn't addressing? What's the policy situation?
It seems like a major gap. Indonesia has this Smart Indonesia program, which sounds good on paper. It aims to develop education, especially in peripheral or border areas. But in practice, it seems the focus is mostly on things like scholarships and maybe some teacher training, not so much on building or upgrading the actual physical infrastructure like labs or internet connectivity.
And funding for schools.
That's another issue. Schools get operational funds, known as BOS funds, but the amount is often relatively small, especially for schools with fewer students. SMPN2 Subatik Tenga, for instance, has fewer than 50 students in total. That means their BOS funding is minimal, nowhere near enough to build a language lab or install reliable internet. They're stuck.
Which just reinforces the challenges faced by rural or remote schools, I suppose.
Exactly. It's a well-documented issue, not just in Indonesia, but globally. Researchers like Luce and Zubaida and Hargreaves and others have pointed out that rural schools often lag behind urban ones. Fewer resources, sometimes fewer qualified teachers, leading to potentially less dynamic or engaging teaching. Subatik Island is, unfortunately, a very clear example of these systemic disadvantages playing out.
So let's try and pull this all together. It's quite a picture. We've got Subatik Island, geographically unique, right on the border with Malaysia, which offers this amazing sort of natural advantage for learning English through daily exposure. But then that inherent potential seems to be really hampered by a whole mix of things. Gaps in how some teachers understand CLT, students lacking confidence, and then these really significant external shortfalls. Inconsistent policies, lack of supervision, and this glaring absence of basic tools like language labs and internet.
It really does paint a complex picture, and it makes you think, doesn't it? If geographical location can be this two-edged sword for language learning, it prompts a question for you, listening. How might the environment in your own learning journey, or maybe your professional development, the resources you have, the kind of leadership or support you get, how might that be subtly shaping your growth, perhaps in ways you haven't fully considered?
That's a great point. And for anyone involved in education with their teachers or policymakers, this deep dive really underscores something crucial. It's not just what you teach, it's how you teach it, where you teach it, and critically, who is supporting that process. Those factors are just as important, maybe even more so. Perhaps, as the study hinted, rethinking assessment could be part of the key. Moving towards more practical, engaging projects like maybe having students create short dramas in English or make video content, things that inherently require communication could be a way to unlock that potential we know is there.